The explosion rocked the quiet neighborhood of Willow Creek at precisely 7:18 a.m. on a Tuesday. Glass shattered, birds scattered into the morning sky, and Evelyn Morgan, still in her faded blue pajamas with tiny golden stars, stood frozen in her kitchen, watching as her beloved antique teapot smoldered in pieces across her tiled floor. That teapot had survived 4 generations of Morgan women. It had not, however, survived Evelyn's reaction to the letter she'd just opened, the 3rd such letter in 2 months, offering to buy her modest Victorian cottage for an exclusive luxury development opportunity. $600,000, she muttered, crumpling the letter. As if I'd sell my grandmother's home for any amount of their blood money. 3 miles away, in the penthouse suite of the Archer Tower, Maxwell Blackwood was not having a better morning. His Italian espresso had gone cold as he glared at the property acquisition map spread across his desk, one tiny red dot mocking his otherwise perfect collection of green checkmarks. 43 Magnolia Street, he growled to his assistant, Penelope, who was furiously typing notes on her tablet. It's the last property we need. What part of unlimited budget did the acquisition team not understand? Penelope cleared her throat. Sir, Ms. Morgan has been particularly resistant. She's refused all offers and threatened our last representative with a garden hose. A garden hose? Maxwell's eyebrow arched perfectly, a move that had been featured twice in Forbes' 30 Under 30 photo shoots. At 34, Maxwell Blackwood had built Blackwood Enterprises from a small tech startup into a real estate and development empire worth billions. He didn't lose. Ever. Fine, he said, standing abruptly and buttoning his tailored navy suit jacket. If you want something done right... Sir? Penelope's eyes widened. You're not going yourself? This project breaks ground in 60 days. I don't have time for some sentimental holdout with a garden hose. 40 minutes later, Maxwell's sleek black Aston Martin slid to a stop in front of a quaint Victorian cottage with an absurdly well-tended garden. The house was charming, he had to admit. Mint green with white trim, surrounded by roses and a white picket fence that looked like something from a storybook. Completely out of place among the modern homes that developers like himself had, gradually introduced to the neighborhood. As he opened his car door, something small and wet hit him directly in the face. Then another, and another. What in the... he sputtered, looking up to see a sprinkler system raining down on his $12,000 suit. No trespassing, called a female voice. That includes corporate vultures. And there she was, a petite woman with wild copper curls tumbling past her shoulders, wearing paint-splattered overalls and wielding a garden spade like a weapon. Her eyes were bright green and fiery with indignation. For the first time in his adult life, Maxwell Blackwood was momentarily speechless. Ms. Morgan, I presume, he finally said, wiping water from his face with his monogrammed handkerchief. And you must be the next sacrificial lamb from Blackwood Enterprises, she retorted, crossing her arms. Tell your boss I'm not selling. Not for $600,000, not for $6 million. I am the boss, Maxwell replied coolly. Maxwell Blackwood, and I think we got off on the wrong foot. Evelyn snorted. Along with the wrong sprinkler system? What a shame. I'd like to make you a better offer. He reached into his jacket for a business card, only to find the expensive cardstock soggy and ruined. Not interested. Evelyn turned to go back inside. $1 million, Maxwell said, quickly. Double our previous offer. She paused, then slowly turned back. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Doubt? Temptation. But it was quickly replaced by renewed determination. Mr. Blackwood, this house has been in my family for 4 generations. My grandmother was born in the master bedroom. I learned to walk in the living room and ride a bike in that driveway. I scattered my parents' ashes in that garden. She pointed to a rose bush heavy with deep red blooms. What exactly in your life is so precious that no amount of money could make you give it up? The question caught him off guard. Maxwell had spent his life acquiring things, companies, properties, assets. The concept of something he wouldn't sell was foreign. "Everyone has a price, Ms. Morgan," he said finally. "Then you're poorer than I thought," she replied, her voice suddenly soft with what sounded strangely like pity. "Have a nice day, Mr. Blackwood. Please don't come back." As the door clicked shut, Maxwell stood dripping on the sidewalk, feeling oddly as though he'd just lost a battle he hadn't known he was fighting. He glanced at the house again, taking in its imperfect charm, its obvious history. For the first time in his career, Maxwell Blackwood wondered if there might be something worth more than the bottom line. Then he shook his head, clearing away the momentary weakness. He hadn't built an empire by being sentimental. He needed that property, and Maxwell Blackwood always got what he wanted. He just needed a new strategy. And as he slid back into his car, a smile slowly spread across his face. Evelyn Morgan might think she'd won this round, but the game was just beginning. "You did what?" Penelope's voice reached a pitch only dogs should have been able to hear. Maxwell Blackwood winced, shrugging out of his soaked suit jacket. He'd returned to the office in a foul mood, his perfect hair plastered to his forehead, Italian leather shoes squelching with every step. "I merely introduced myself to Ms. Morgan," he said, accepting the towel his assistant handed him. "The meeting was informative. She turned the sprinklers on you," Penelope stated flatly, not bothering to phrase it as a question. "The most powerful real estate developer in the Northeast, and she watered you like a begonia." "Thank you for that poetic assessment, Penelope. Has the research team sent over the information I requested?" "Yes, but nothing. I need everything there is to know about Evelyn Morgan. Every parking ticket, every social media post, every subscription. I want to know what cereal she eats for breakfast." Penelope sighed and handed over a tablet. "She's not exactly leaving a digital footprint the size of yours. Evelyn Morgan, 31, art teacher at Willow Creek Elementary, BA in Fine Arts from Rhode, Island School of Design, parents deceased, car accident 5 years ago, no siblings. The house was left to her. She has a small Etsy shop selling watercolor paintings of local landmarks, mostly historical buildings." Ironically. Maxwell skimmed through the file, his eyes narrowing at a particular entry. "The Willow Creek Historical Preservation Society?" "She's on the board," Penelope confirmed. "They meet every Thursday at the public library." A slow smile spread across Maxwell's face. "Cancel my Thursday dinner with the Japanese investors. I've suddenly developed a deep interest in local history." Evelyn Morgan was having a terrible day. First, the principal had informed her that the school's art budget was being cut. Again. Then, her car had made an ominous clicking sound all the way home. And now, she was late for the Historical Society meeting, rushing into the library's conference room with her arms full of preservation proposals and a half-eaten granola bar clutched between her teeth. "Sorry I'm late," she mumbled, sliding into her usual seat beside Eleanor Pembroke, the Society's 78-year-old president. Budget meetings ran long and... She stopped abruptly, the granola bar dropping to the table with a sad little thud. Sitting directly across from her, looking completely at ease in the library's uncomfortable plastic chair, was Maxwell Blackwood. "What are you doing here?" she blurted out. "Ms. Morgan," he nodded politely. "What a pleasant surprise." "Mr. Blackwood has expressed interest in joining our little group," Eleanor explained, beaming at the billionaire like he was a particularly handsome lottery ticket. "He's made a very generous donation to the library's roof restoration fund." "How civic-minded," Evelyn managed, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Especially for someone who makes a living tearing down historic buildings." "Actually," Maxwell interjected smoothly, "Blackwood Enterprises has restored 17 historic properties in the last 3 years alone. The Harrington Hotel in Boston, the old mill factory in Providence. Perhaps you've seen them?" Evelyn had seen them. She'd even taken her students on field trips to the old mill, which had been beautifully converted into an interactive museum. It was annoyingly well done. "That's commercial restoration," she said dismissively. "It's not the same as preserving neighborhood character." "Perhaps I could learn more about that from experts like yourself," Maxwell replied, his gray eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her blink first. "I'm always open to new perspectives." Eleanor clasped her hands together delightedly. "Mr. Blackwood has offered to host next month's fundraising gala at his penthouse. Isn't that generous?" The meeting continued, but Evelyn could barely focus. What was his game? Was he trying to butter up the historical society to get around her refusal to sell? Or worse, was he attempting to dig up some zoning loophole that would force her out? After the meeting, she cornered him by the water cooler. "I know what you're doing," she hissed. "Getting hydrated?" Maxwell asked innocently, filling a small paper cup. "This little community benefactor act. It won't work." "Ms. Morgan, Evelyn," he said, lowering his voice. "Has it occurred to you that perhaps I genuinely care about historical preservation?" "No," she said flatly. "It hasn't." He laughed then, a genuine sound that caught her off guard. "You're refreshingly direct. Most people don't speak to me that way. Most people probably want something from you. And you don't? I want you to leave my house alone," she said, crossing her arms. "That's all. Come to dinner with me," he said suddenly. Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me?" "Dinner. A meal typically eaten in the evening. You and me at a restaurant of your choosing." "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm going to change your mind about me," he said with maddening confidence. "And about the development project. Not going to happen." "Then you have nothing to lose by coming to dinner," he pointed out. "Free meal, opportunity to tell me exactly how wrong I am about everything. Sounds like your idea of fun, doesn't it?" Evelyn hated that he had a point. She also hated that she was suddenly noticing how his crisp white shirt contrasted with his tanned skin, or how his smile created a small dimple in his left cheek. "Fine," she said finally. "One dinner, but I'm picking the place, and nothing you say will change my mind." "Of course," Maxwell agreed, looking inexplicably pleased. "Shall I pick you up tomorrow at 7? "I'll meet you there," Evelyn replied quickly. The last thing she needed was Maxwell Blackwood at her house again. She scribbled an address on a library notepad and handed it to him. "Don't be late." As she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back and fought the urge to smooth her unruly curls. This was strategic, she told herself. Know thy enemy and all that. It had nothing to do with the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or how he somehow managed to make a simple white shirt look like it had been created specifically for his shoulders. Nothing at all. Tony's Pizzeria? Maxwell stared at the address Evelyn had given him. She can choose any restaurant in the city and she picks a pizza joint in Little Italy? Maybe she's testing you, Penelope suggested, not looking up from her tablet. Seeing if you're too snobbish to eat there. "I'm not snobbish," Maxwell protested. "I have taste. There's a difference." Penelope hummed, unconvinced. "So what's your plan? Wine and dine her until she signs over her family home?" Maxwell frowned. He hadn't actually thought that far ahead. Usually, his persuasive abilities were sufficient for any business negotiation. But Evelyn Morgan wasn't like his usual business associates. She was unpredictable, principled, and infuriatingly immune to his usual charm. "I'm going to listen," he said finally, surprising himself with the answer. "Find out what really matters to her. There must be something she wants more than that house." "Maybe what she wants is the house," Penelope said quietly. Maxwell shook his head. "Everyone wants something else. Something more. I just need to figure out what it is." But as he prepared for dinner, Maxwell couldn't shake the memory of Evelyn's face when she talked about her grandmother being born in that house, about scattering her parents' ashes in the garden for the first time. He wondered if perhaps there were some things money truly couldn't buy. He pushed the uncomfortable thought aside. He was Maxwell Blackwood. He'd built an empire by turning obstacles into opportunities. One stubborn art teacher wasn't going to change that, even if she did have the most captivating green eyes he'd ever seen. Tony's Pizzeria was exactly the kind of place Maxwell Blackwood never frequented. Red checkered tablecloths, slightly wobbly tables, and walls covered with faded photographs of Italian grandparents. The scent of garlic, tomato sauce, and freshly baked dough filled the air. Despite himself, Maxwell's stomach growled appreciatively. He'd arrived 15 minutes early, instinctively checking his watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe worth more than most cars. His driver had looked positively scandalized when Maxwell instructed him to stop at the modest corner restaurant. "You want me to pick you up later, sir?" the driver had asked dubiously. "No, James. I'll find my own way home," Maxwell had replied, though in truth, he had no idea how long this dinner would last. Knowing Evelyn Morgan, she might storm out within 5 minutes. "Maxwell Blackwood?" A booming voice interrupted his thoughts. A large, barrel-chested man with impressive gray eyebrows approached his table. "You must be Evie's date." "I'm meeting Ms. Morgan for dinner," Maxwell clarified, rising to shake the man's massive hand. "Though I wouldn't call it a date." "Tony." "Rizzo," the man introduced himself. "This my place. Evie's favorite since she was little." He leaned in conspirationally. "She say you're a big-shot developer trying to buy her house." Maxwell sighed. "Word travels fast." "Small neighborhood," Tony shrugged. "She also say you probably too fancy for my pizza." His eyes twinkled with challenge. "I assure you, I enjoy good food whatever its provenance," Maxwell replied, slightly offended. Tony laughed. "Big words. We see if your taste is as fancy as your watch." He disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Maxwell wondering exactly what he'd gotten himself into. The door chimed, and Maxwell looked up to see Evelyn entering the restaurant. He barely recognized her at first. Gone were the paint-splattered overalls and messy ponytail. Instead, she wore a simple emerald green dress that made her eyes look impossibly brighter, her copper curls falling softly around her shoulders. Maxwell stood automatically, an old-fashioned gesture his mother had drilled into him decades ago. For a moment, he forgot why they were meeting at all. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Blackwood," Evelyn said, sliding into the seat opposite him. "I half expected you to show up in a hazmat suit after your sprinkler experience." "You look different," he managed, regaining his composure. "In a good way." "Don't sound so surprised," she replied dryly. "Even art teachers own a dress or two." "Evie!" Tony's voice boomed again as he emerged from the kitchen, arms outstretched. Evelyn rose to receive his enthusiastic hug, her face lighting up with genuine affection. "Tony, don't embarrass me," she laughed, though she was clearly pleased by the warm reception. "Never. You bring handsome man to dinner, I make special pizza. On the house." "That's not necessary," Maxwell began. "Is necessary," Tony insisted. "Evie is family. When her parents died," he crossed himself, "she come here every Sunday alone. I tell her, family is family, even when broken." He patted Evelyn's shoulder gently. "Now, you drink wine, talk nice. No fighting about houses. Tonight." As Tony bustled away, an awkward silence fell between them. Maxwell noticed the slight sheen in Evelyn's eyes before she blinked it away. "So," he said gently, "you've been coming here a long time?" Evelyn nodded, visibly gathering herself. "Since I was a kid. My dad was Italian, second generation. He brought me here for my 5th birthday." She smiled at the memory. "I got tomato sauce all over my new dress, but he didn't care. He said enjoying food was more important than staying clean. He sounds wise, Maxwell said, surprised by his own sincerity. He was, Evelyn agreed. Both my parents were. They were researchers, environmental scientists. They spent their lives trying to protect beautiful, irreplaceable things. Her gaze hardened slightly. I guess that's where I get it from. Protecting irreplaceable things, Maxwell repeated thoughtfully. Is that how you see your resistance to the development? Preservation? Isn't that obvious? Evelyn leaned forward. Your company buys properties, tears them down, builds luxury condos or shopping centers. And for what? So that every city, every neighborhood looks exactly the same? So you can make more money you don't need? Maxwell bristled. That's an oversimplification. Development creates jobs, improves infrastructure. It also displaces communities and erases history. Evelyn countered. What happens to the families who can't afford your luxury apartments? Where do they go? Before Maxwell could respond, Tony appeared with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Special reserve, he announced proudly. From my cousin's vineyard in Sicily. Thank you, Tony, Evelyn said warmly. After Tony poured the wine and departed with another meaningful look at Maxwell, Evelyn sighed. Look, I didn't come here to lecture you about urban development. I know you have your reasons for what you do. But you disagree with them. Fundamentally, she admitted, taking a sip of wine. But I'm curious. Why that location? There are plenty of other places to build your next monument to capitalism. Why my neighborhood? Why my house? The question was reasonable, and Maxwell found himself answering honestly. Location primarily. It's the last underdeveloped area close to downtown with waterfront access. The river view alone increases property values by 30%. Ah, Evelyn nodded. The almighty dollar. It's not just that, Maxwell said, surprising himself with his defensive tone. The development plan includes public green spaces, a community center, affordable housing units. Wait, Evelyn interrupted. Affordable housing? That wasn't in any of the proposals I've seen. Maxwell hesitated. It's a recent addition. How recent? Like since you met me recent. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Evelyn's expression was unreadable as she studied him. Well, she said finally, at least you're capable of adapting your plans, but it doesn't change anything. My house isn't for sale. Before Maxwell could respond, Tony arrived with their pizza, a magnificent creation topped with prosciutto, arugula, and what looked like freshly shaved truffle. My special, Tony announced proudly, for special occasion. The first bite silenced both of them. The crust was perfectly crisp yet tender, the toppings a harmonious blend of flavors. Maxwell couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed a meal so simple yet so satisfying. This is incredible, he admitted. Tony's the best, Evelyn agreed, her expression softening as she enjoyed the food. Some things can't be improved by being fancier or more expensive. They're perfect, just as they are. Maxwell recognized the metaphor, but chose not to engage with it directly. Instead, he found himself asking, so how does one become an elementary school art teacher? Was that always your dream? Something flickered across Evelyn's face. Surprise at his genuine interest, perhaps. Not exactly, she admitted. I wanted to be a professional artist. Had delusions of galleries in New York, critical acclaim, the whole fantasy. She shrugged. Reality had other plans. But teaching art to kids, it's better, in a way. More meaningful. How so? Maxwell asked, genuinely curious. I get to be there when they discover they can create something from nothing. When they realize they have the power to make beauty that didn't exist before. Her eyes lit up as she spoke. Some of these kids come from difficult backgrounds. Art gives them control, expression. Sometimes it's the only place they feel safe being themselves. Maxwell watched her, struck by the passion in her voice. When was the last time he'd felt that way about anything? His work had become a relentless pursuit of the next acquisition, the next development, the next billion. When had success become? A treadmill rather than a destination? Your school, he said abruptly. The one with the budget cuts. What would make a difference there? Evelyn looked surprised by the question. What do you mean? If money weren't an object, what would you want for your students? She considered this, twirling a strand of copper hair absently. A real art studio, proper supplies, maybe visiting artists to inspire them. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. Why? Just curious, Maxwell replied innocently. Professional interest in education. Right, Evelyn said skeptically. And this wouldn't be an attempt to bribe me into selling my house. Would it work? He asked, half joking. Not a chance, she replied immediately. But points for creativity. As dinner continued, Maxwell found himself genuinely enjoying Evelyn's company. She was sharp-witted, passionate, and refreshingly direct. She challenged him in ways his usual social circle never did. When she laughed, really laughed, at something he said, he felt a strange sense of accomplishment that rivaled closing his biggest deals. By the time they'd finished dessert, a tiramisu that Tony insisted they share, Maxwell realized that for the first time in years, he hadn't checked his phone once during a meal. Thank you for dinner, Evelyn said, as they stepped outside into the cool evening air. It wasn't as terrible as I expected. High praise indeed, Maxwell replied dryly. I still won't sell you my house, she added, as if she feared he might have forgotten the purpose of their meeting. I didn't expect one dinner would change your mind, he said. But perhaps I've convinced you I'm not entirely the corporate villain you imagined. Under the soft glow of the street lamp, Evelyn's eyes studied him intently. The jury's still out on that, she said finally. But you have better taste in pizza than I expected. High praise indeed, he repeated with a small smile. Can I give you a ride home? No need, she replied, gesturing to an ancient blue Volkswagen Beetle parked nearby. Old Betsy and I have it covered. Maxwell eyed the car dubiously. That vehicle looks like it belongs in a museum, not on public roads. She's got character, Evelyn defended, unlike those soulless luxury cars that all look the same. Let me guess. Another metaphor for development versus preservation? Evelyn laughed. You're catching on, Blackwood. She hesitated, then added, The Historical Society is having a walking tour of Willow Creek's original buildings this Saturday. If you're serious about learning neighborhood preservation, you could come. The invitation surprised them both, judging by the slight widening of Evelyn's eyes, as if she hadn't planned to extend it. I'd like that, Maxwell said, equally surprised by his own sincerity. As she drove away in her questionable vehicle, Maxwell remained on the sidewalk, watching until her taillights disappeared around the corner. An unsettling realization was forming in his mind. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he wanted to win this particular negotiation. And that was a problem he hadn't anticipated. You're going on a historical walking tour? Penelope's voice was thick with disbelief as she stood in Maxwell's penthouse office early Saturday morning. Voluntarily? Maxwell adjusted his casual attire, dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, in the reflection of his floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below, a testament to his vision and ambition. Somewhere in that landscape was a small, green, Victorian cottage that was becoming the most frustrating obstacle of his career. It's research, he said dismissively. Know your opponent's passion. Penelope hummed, not bothering to hide her skepticism. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you've mentioned Evelyn Morgan's name 17 times since your dinner on Wednesday? Maxwell shot her a warning look. I don't pay you to count my words, Penelope. No, you pay me to tell you when. You're being an idiot, she replied cheerfully. The board meeting is on Monday. Investors are expecting an update on the Willow Creek development. What exactly are you planning to tell them? Maxwell frowned. He'd been avoiding thinking about that particular problem, that negotiations are ongoing. Negotiations? Penelope arched an eyebrow. Is that what you call dinner at Tony's and history walks? I'm exploring alternative approaches, Maxwell said stiffly. Alternative to what? Actually doing your job? Penelope softened her tone. Max, I've worked with you for 7 years. I've never seen you hesitate on a deal before. What's really going on? Maxwell turned from the window, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. I don't know, he admitted. There's something about her conviction. It's making me question things. Things like whether this development is the right move for that neighborhood, he said quietly. Like whether some things really are worth more than their market value. Penelope stared at him for a long moment. You know the board won't care about any of that. I know. And you know Richard Carson will swoop in to take over the project, and possibly your position, if you show any weakness. Maxwell's jaw tightened at the mention of his chief rival at Blackwood Enterprises. Richard had been gunning for Maxwell's position for years, waiting for him to make a single misstep. I'm aware. So what are you going to do? Penelope asked. Maxwell checked his watch, a more modest timepiece than his usual selection. First, I'm going to learn about historical architecture. Then, I'll figure the rest out. The Willow Creek Historical Society had gathered at the Old Town Square, a quaint cobblestone plaza surrounded by some of the neighborhood's oldest buildings. About 20 people milled about, most of them at least 3 decades older than Maxwell. Eleanor Pembroke, clutching a megaphone nearly her own size, was organizing name tags. Mr. Blackwood, she exclaimed when she spotted him. How wonderful that you could join us. Here's your name tag, dear. We're just about to begin. Maxwell accepted the adhesive tag with, Hello, I'm Maxwell, written in wobbling marker. He was in the process of discreetly sliding it into his pocket when a familiar voice spoke behind him. Don't even think about it, Blackwood. If I have to wear one, so do you. He turned to find Evelyn grinning at him, her own name tag prominently displayed on her emerald green cardigan. Her hair was loosely braided over one shoulder, and she wore dark jeans and comfortable walking shoes. She looked simultaneously casual and striking. I wasn't aware corporate dress codes extended to weekend activities, Maxwell replied dryly, but he dutifully attached the name tag to his shirt. I'm surprised you actually came, Evelyn admitted. I half expected you to send some unfortunate intern in your place. I always keep my word, Maxwell said. Besides, I'm genuinely curious about what you find so worth preserving here. Something changed in Evelyn's expression. A softening, perhaps, or a flicker of appreciation. Well, you're about to find out. Eleanor gives a mean tour. Comfortable. Shoes? Maxwell glanced down at his Italian leather loafers. Relatively. Evelyn's eyes twinkled with mischief. We'll see if you're still saying that after 3 hours. Eleanor's voice, magnified by the megaphone, summoned the group to attention. Welcome, history enthusiasts. Today we'll be exploring Willow Creek's architectural heritage, from the Revolutionary-era Miller's Tavern to the Victorian masterpieces of the 1890s. As the tour proceeded, Maxwell found himself genuinely interested in the neighborhood's evolution. The old buildings told a story of the community's growth, each architectural style reflecting a different era of prosperity and cultural influence. Eleanor was surprisingly knowledgeable, explaining how certain features were responses to social changes or technological advancements. The Widow's Walk on the Thompson House, she explained, pointing to a railed platform atop a federal-style mansion, was designed so that sea captains' wives could watch for their husbands' ships returning to port. though ironically, they were more often used to spot neighborhood gossip than ships, Evelyn whispered to Maxwell, making him chuckle. They paused before a row of Victorian-style homes, and Maxwell immediately recognized the distinctive architecture of Evelyn's cottage, though her house wasn't part of the tour route. These homes were built during the neighborhood's second boom period, Eleanor explained, when the textile mill brought prosperity to the area in the Boer 1880s. Note the intricate gingerbread trim, the asymmetrical facades, and the vibrant colors, all hallmarks of the Queen Anne style. They're beautiful, Maxwell said quietly, surprised by his own sincerity. Yes, they are, Evelyn agreed, and they're survivors. Most of this neighborhood was lost to urban renewal in the 1960s. She made air quotes around the term. Perfectly. Good homes and shops demolished for strip malls and parking lots. Not all development is thoughtless, Maxwell countered. No, Evelyn conceded. But too much of it is. When developers look at old buildings, they see outdated structures taking up valuable real estate. They don't see the craftsmanship, the history, the lives lived within those walls. As they walked, Maxwell found himself seeing the neighborhood through new eyes. He noticed details he would have overlooked before. Hand-carved corbels supporting roof lines, stained glass transoms, casting colored light across entryways, the way certain buildings were positioned to create natural gathering spaces between them. The Miller house is my favorite, Evelyn said as they approached a stately brick federal-style home with white columns. Built in 1802 by the town's first mayor, it was almost demolished in the 1970s for a fast food restaurant. What saved it? Maxwell asked. People like Eleanor. Evelyn smiled, gesturing to the elderly woman still enthusiastically leading the group. She chained herself to the front door and refused to move until the city granted it historical protection status. Maxwell raised his eyebrows, impressed. Seems activism runs deep in this community. When something matters, Evelyn said pointedly, you fight for it. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Maxwell felt an unexpected connection, a mutual recognition of passion and principle, even if directed toward different goals. The moment was broken when Eleanor's voice called out, and now, the highlight of our tour, the Harrington Carriage House, recently restored by none other than our guest, Mr. Blackwood. All eyes turned to Maxwell, who blinked in surprise. I'm sorry? Your company's historical division, Eleanor explained. They did a magnificent job preserving the original 1850s timber frame while adapting the interior for modern use as a community center. Maxwell vaguely recalled approving the project years ago, a small restoration his company had undertaken as part of a larger development deal. He'd never actually visited the completed site. Yes, he recovered smoothly. We're quite proud of that project. Evelyn was looking at him with an unreadable expression. I didn't realize that was your company's work, she said quietly, as the group moved toward the carriage house. It's one of the best restorations in the area. I have talented people, Maxwell said, uncomfortable with praise he hadn't personally earned. The carriage house was indeed beautiful, the exterior faithfully restored to its 1850s appearance, while the interior had been thoughtfully adapted into a bright, inviting space where community groups could gather. Children's artwork decorated one wall, products of an after-school program that met there weekly. We did art classes here last summer, Evelyn said, examining a colorful mural created by her students. The kids loved working in a space with so much character. As the tour continued, Maxwell found himself asking more questions, engaging with the history in a way he never had before. By the time they reached the final stop, a charming gazebo in the neighborhood's Central Park, his expensive loafers were indeed pinching his feet, but he hardly noticed. The group dispersed, many heading to the local cafe for refreshments. Maxwell and Evelyn lingered in the gazebo, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the park. Well, Evelyn asked, Verdict on neighborhood preservation? I understand it better, Maxwell admitted. The continuity, the craftsmanship, the sense of place. I see why it matters to you. But not enough to abandon your development plans, she guessed. Maxwell sighed. It's complicated, Evelyn. There are investors, contracts, millions already invested in planning and permits. Right, she nodded, disappointment evident in her voice. Just business. It's not just... Maxwell began, then stopped himself. Look, come to my office on Monday. I want to show you the full plans, the community benefits. Maybe we can find a compromise. Evelyn looked skeptical. What kind of compromise? I don't know yet, Maxwell admitted, but I'm willing to look for one if you are. She studied him, as if trying to detect deception in his offer. Finally, she nodded. Monday, then, but I'm not promising anything. Neither am I, Maxwell replied, though in truth, he was already formulating alterations to the development plan in his mind. Ways to preserve more of the neighborhood's character while still making the project viable. As they parted ways at the park entrance, Evelyn surprising him with a quick, spontaneous hug that left a trace of her floral perfume on his shirt, Maxwell realized something disturbing. For the first time in his career, he was emotionally invested in a negotiation's outcome beyond its financial impact. And as he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed with an incoming text from Richard Carson. Board expects full project update Monday. Sources say you're getting cold feet on Willow Creek. True? Maxwell stared at the message, a cold weight settling in his stomach. The professional and personal were colliding in a way he hadn't anticipated, and he wasn't sure which would emerge intact. Blackwood Enterprises occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming glass tower in the heart of downtown. As Evelyn stepped into the marble-floored lobby Monday morning, she felt distinctly out of place in her modest floral dress and cardigan among the sleek suits and clicking heels of corporate ambition. Ms. Morgan? A security guard approached. Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Please take the express elevator to the 50th floor. The express elevator, a glass capsule that traveled up the building's exterior, offered breathtaking views of the city as it ascended. Evelyn watched the urban landscape unfold beneath her, a tapestry of old and new, preservation and development. Somewhere in that vista was her little green cottage, a tiny holdout against the relentless march of progress. What am I doing here? She muttered to herself. Was she really considering a compromise? Or was she simply prolonging the inevitable? She'd spent the weekend thinking about Maxwell, his surprising engagement during the walking tour, his apparent interest in preservation, the way his gray eyes had softened when looking at the community artwork in the carriage house. Then again, men like Maxwell Blackwood didn't become billionaires by surrendering their objectives. This could all be an elaborate strategy to gain her trust. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a stunning reception area, minimalist white furniture, cascading living walls of greenery, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing panoramic city views. A meticulously groomed receptionist greeted her. Ms. Morgan, welcome to Blackwood Enterprises. Mr. Blackwood is in a meeting, but Ms. Chen will show you to the conference room. On cue, Penelope appeared, tablet in hand. Ms. Morgan, nice to finally meet you in person. Likewise, Evelyn replied, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. Penelope represented the corporate machine she'd been fighting against. Maxwell speaks very highly of you, Penelope said, as she led Evelyn down a corridor of glass offices. Which is unusual. He rarely speaks highly of anyone. I find that easy to believe, Evelyn remarked dryly. Penelope's lips twitched with amusement. He's not as bad as his reputation suggests. Difficult, yes. Demanding, absolutely, but fair. Is this where you tell me what a humanitarian he is beneath the ruthless billionaire exterior? No, Penelope replied frankly. This is where I tell you that in 7 years, I've never seen him compromise on a development plan. Until now. Before Evelyn could process that statement, Penelope opened a door to reveal a vast conference room dominated by a holographic display of Willow Creek. The digital model showed the neighborhood in perfect detail. Every house, every tree, every uneven sidewalk captured with eerie precision. "Maxwell will join you shortly. There's coffee and refreshments if you'd like." With that, Penelope departed, leaving Evelyn alone with the ghostly digital twin of her neighborhood. Curiosity drew her closer to the display. She recognized familiar landmarks, the library, the elementary school where she taught, the park with its historic gazebo. And there, in the center of a digital construction zone, was her house, surrounded by imaginary bulldozers. "It's unsettling, isn't it?" Evelyn turned to find Maxwell entering the room, his usual immaculate appearance somewhat disheveled. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hand through it repeatedly. "Seeing your home reduced to data points and market value projections," he continued, joining her at the display. "Unsettling is one word for it," Evelyn agreed. "Dehumanizing might be another." Maxwell nodded, surprising her with his agreement. "That's fair." He gestured toward the digital model. "This is the original plan. Luxury condos, high-end retail, underground parking. Projected revenue, $4.2 billion over 15 years. With a wave of his hand, the hologram shifted, the sleek modern structures shrinking, rearranging. "And this is what I was working on all weekend." Evelyn watched in fascination as the digital neighborhood transformed. The development was still there, but scaled back, concentrated along the neighborhood's edge rather than its historic center. More green spaces appeared, and at the center, "My house," she breathed. "It's still there." "Along with the entire historical district," Maxwell confirmed. "The development would be built around the existing structures, with design elements that complement rather than overwhelm the historical architecture." He swallowed visibly. "Projected revenue, $2.8 billion, a 33% reduction." Evelyn stared at him, trying to process what she was seeing. "You're serious about this?" "I am," Maxwell said quietly. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Maxwell's gaze fixed on hers, a surprising vulnerability in his expression. "Because you made me see things differently. Because some things are worth preserving." The air between them seemed to change, charged with something beyond their professional negotiation. For a moment, Evelyn could see past the billionaire facade to the man beneath. A man capable of change, of growth, of reassessing his values. "Maxwell," she began. The conference room door burst open, interrupting whatever she'd been about to say. A tall, shark-like man in his 50s strode in, flanked by several serious-looking executives. "There you are, Blackwood," the man said, ignoring Evelyn completely. "The board is assembled. They're waiting for your presentation." Maxwell's expression hardened instantly, the vulnerability vanishing behind his corporate mask. "Richard, I wasn't aware you were joining us today. The chairman thought it best I attend, given the rumors about your hesitation on the Willow Creek project." Richard's cold gaze finally acknowledged Evelyn. "And this must be the famous Ms. Morgan, the schoolteacher who's costing our shareholders millions." Evelyn bristled. "I prefer property owner exercising her rights, actually." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Charming. Maxwell, the board is waiting. I've taken the liberty of preparing the original presentation materials." "I've made some revisions to the plan," Maxwell said, his voice professionally neutral despite the tension radiating from him. "Have you indeed?" Richard's tone dripped with false surprise. "How fascinating. I'm sure the board will be most interested to hear your reasons for slashing projected revenues by a third." Maxwell's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Evelyn, would you excuse us? This shouldn't take long." "Actually," Richard interjected smoothly, Perhaps Ms. Morgan would like to observe the presentation? After all, she's a key stakeholder in this project. Evelyn glanced between the two men, sensing the power struggle unfolding before her. Richard clearly wanted her to witness Maxwell's professional humiliation, while Maxwell looked like he'd rather she didn't see what was about to happen. "I'd be interested to hear how you present your revised plan," she said carefully. Something like resignation flickered across Maxwell's face before he nodded. "Very well. This way, please." The boardroom was intimidating. A vast space dominated by a polished table where 12 immaculately dressed executives sat waiting, their expressions ranging from impatient to openly hostile. Maxwell guided Evelyn to a chair near the back of the room, then took his position at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with practiced confidence, "thank you for your time today. I'd like to present a revised vision for the Willow Creek Development Project." Richard interrupted immediately. "Before we begin, the board has received concerning reports about your commitment to this project, Maxwell. Perhaps we should address those first?" Maxwell's expression remained neutral, but Evelyn caught the slight tightening of his hands at his sides. "My commitment to creating value for our shareholders remains absolute, Richard. What has evolved is my understanding of how best to achieve that value." An elderly man at the far end of the table, presumably the chairman, leaned forward. "We were promised a revolutionary development, Blackwood, the largest in the company's history." "And you'll have it," Maxwell assured him, activating the holographic display, "but with a more nuanced approach that respects the neighborhood's historical significance while still delivering exceptional returns." As Maxwell presented his revised plan, Evelyn watched the room's reaction. Most of the board members looked skeptical, some openly dismissive. Richard stood in the corner, a smug smile playing at his lips as he waited for Maxwell to fail. "In conclusion," Maxwell finished some 20 minutes later, "this revised plan reduces immediate revenue projections, but creates sustainable long-term value, positive community relations, and significant tax benefits through historical preservation. Credits." A heavy silence followed his presentation. "So," the chairman said finally, "you want to abandon our original vision because a school teacher convinced you old buildings have feelings?" Laughter rippled around the table. Maxwell didn't join in. "I want to adapt our vision," he corrected firmly, "because I believe it's the right business decision for long-term growth and community sustainability." Richard stepped forward. "Or perhaps your judgment has been compromised by other factors?" His gaze slid meaningfully toward Evelyn. She felt her cheeks flush with indignation. But before she could respond, Maxwell spoke. "My judgment has been informed by new data and perspectives," he said coldly. "Something all good business leaders should welcome. But if the board prefers the original plan—" He hesitated, and Evelyn held her breath, sensing he stood at a crossroads. "Then I suggest you find someone else to execute it." Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. Even Richard looked taken aback. "Are you threatening to resign, Blackwood?" the chairman demanded. "I'm stating a fact," Maxwell replied evenly. "I believe in this revised vision. If you don't, that's your prerogative. But I won't attach my name to a project that destroys something valuable when we have viable alternatives." The chairman studied Maxwell for a long moment. "You've never balked at a development before. Not once in 15 years. "Perhaps that's the problem," Maxwell said quietly. "Perhaps I should have asked better questions sooner." "This is absurd," Richard interjected. "He's clearly lost objectivity. I'm prepared to take over the project immediately and proceed with the original plan." Maxwell said nothing, his expression unreadable as he waited for the board's verdict. Evelyn felt a surge of admiration for his stance, even as she worried about what it might cost him. The chairman sighed heavily. "Maxwell, you've earned some latitude here. Your track record speaks for itself. We'll review your revised proposal and reconvene tomorrow for a decision." Relief flickered briefly across Maxwell's face before his professional mask returned. "Thank you, sir." As the meeting dispersed, Richard brushed past Maxwell. "You're making a grave mistake," he muttered, just loud enough for Evelyn to hear. "No," Maxwell replied calmly. "For once, I'm avoiding one." When the boardroom had emptied, leaving them alone, Evelyn approached Maxwell at the display console where he was shutting down the projections. "That was unexpected," she said softly. Maxwell ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it further. "For both of us, apparently." "Did you mean it? About walking away from the project?" He looked at her then, a mix of certainty and vulnerability in his expression. "Yes, I meant it." "Why?" she asked again, needing to understand what had changed for him. Maxwell hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "Because some things can't be measured in profit margins or square footage. Some things have value beyond what can be calculated on a balance sheet." "Things like historic architecture?" Evelyn suggested. "Things like integrity," Maxwell replied, "like standing for something more than just acquisition and expansion." He stepped closer to her, his voice dropping. "Things like the way you look at the world, Evelyn. Seeing beauty and meaning in places I'd trained myself to see only as assets." Evelyn's heart quickened at his proximity, at the sincerity in his voice. "Maxwell, The moment was shattered by Penelope bursting into the room. "Maxwell, the investors from Tokyo are on the line. They've heard rumors about the project, delays." Maxwell closed his eyes briefly, the weight of his professional responsibilities visibly settling back onto his shoulders. "I have to take this," he said apologetically. "I understand," Evelyn nodded, gathering her purse. "I should get going anyway. School pickup duty." "Evelyn," Maxwell called as she reached the door, "whatever happens tomorrow, my offer on the revised plan stands. Your house stays. The historical district stays." She paused, studying him with new eyes. "Thank you. That means a lot." As she rode the elevator back down to street level, Evelyn found herself torn between hope and skepticism. Had she witnessed a genuine transformation in Maxwell Blackwood? Or was this elaborate theater designed to win her trust? And more concerning still, why did part of her hope it was genuine? Why did her heart beat a little faster, remembering how he'd stood up to his board, how he'd looked at her when he spoke of seeing the world through her eyes? "Get a grip, Evelyn," she muttered to herself as she exited the gleaming tower. "He's still a billionaire developer. You're still a school teacher. This isn't a fairy tale." But as she walked to her car, she couldn't quite silence the voice in her heart wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, people really could change for the better when something, or someone, gave them reason to see the world differently. Tuesday morning dawned with a restless energy that followed Evelyn through her classroom. She found herself checking her phone between lessons, something she never did, half expecting news from Maxwell about the board's decision. By lunchtime, the suspense had her nerves frayed like old paint. "Ms. Morgan?" A small voice interrupted her thoughts as she absently stirred her yogurt. "Are you okay? You look weird today." 7-year-old Lily Chen stared up at her with frank curiosity, her pigtails slightly askew from morning art class. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Evelyn assured her with a smile. "Just thinking about grown-up stuff." "My mom says that when grown-ups say they're thinking about grown-up stuff, they're really thinking about kissing someone," Lily announced with the devastating honesty of childhood. Evelyn nearly choked on her yogurt. "Your mom sounds very wise," she managed. "But sometimes grown-ups just have important decisions to make." "About kissing?" Lily persisted. "About houses," Evelyn clarified, "and neighborhoods, and what's worth fighting for." Lily considered this with grave seriousness. "Is it your pretty green house? My mom said a rich man wants to knock it down." News traveled fast in small communities, especially when billionaires started attending historical walking tours. Something like that, Evelyn admitted. But I think maybe he's changed his mind. Because he wants to kiss you? Lily asked, her eyes wide. Before Evelyn could formulate an appropriate response to this alarming line of questioning, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She excused herself from the precocious child and stepped into the hallway to answer. Ms. Morgan? This is Penelope Chen from Blackwood Enterprises. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Yes? Has the board made a decision? They have, Penelope said, her tone professional, but with an undercurrent Evelyn couldn't identify. Maxwell asked me to invite you to meet him at your house at 4 o'clock. He'd like to discuss the outcome in person. In person? Is that good or bad? Evelyn couldn't help asking. That's not for me to say, Penelope replied diplomatically. But if I were you, I'd make sure to be there on time. The remaining school hours passed in a blur. When the final bell rang, Evelyn rushed home, changing out of her work clothes into a simple sundress patterned with tiny blue flowers, a favorite she'd had for years. She brushed her wild curls into some semblance of order, then gave up and let them frame her face naturally. This isn't a date, she reminded her reflection sternly. This is about the future of your home, your neighborhood. Stop acting like a teenager. At precisely 4 o'clock, a black car pulled up in front of her house. Evelyn watched from her living room window as Maxwell emerged, dressed in casual slacks and a light gray sweater rather than his usual corporate armor. He looked different somehow, lighter, as if he'd set down a heavy burden. She met him at the garden gate, her stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. Hello, Maxwell. Evelyn. He greeted her with a small smile. Thank you for meeting me. Well, it is my house, she pointed out. Not much traveling involved. True, he acknowledged. May I come in? There's something I'd like to show you. Evelyn led him into her modest living room, bookshelves overflowing with art books and novels, comfortable but well-worn furniture, walls covered with her own paintings and those of her students. It was a stark contrast to the minimalist luxury of his penthouse office. It's lovely, Maxwell said, taking in the space with genuine interest. It feels lived in, like a real home. As opposed to what? Evelyn asked, curious. As opposed to a showcase, he replied. My penthouse looks like it belongs in an architectural magazine, but sometimes I feel like I'm just passing through it, not actually living there. There was a vulnerability in the admission that caught Evelyn off guard. Before she could respond, Maxwell produced a folder from his briefcase. The board's decision, he said, placing it on her coffee table. Evelyn stared at the folder, suddenly afraid to open it. Just tell me. Maxwell looked directly into her eyes. They approved the revised plan. Your house stays. The historical district stays. Development will be limited to the commercial zone, on the eastern edge of the neighborhood, with designs that complement the existing architecture. Relief flooded through her. Really? They actually agreed? With conditions, Maxwell admitted. The community center has to be scaled back, and we're adding an additional story to the retail spaces to increase revenue. But the heart of the neighborhood survives, Evelyn said, a smile breaking across her face. That's wonderful, Maxwell. Thank you for fighting for this. Don't thank me yet, he said mysteriously. There's more. Maxwell opened the folder to reveal architectural drawings, not of the development, but of Willow Creek Elementary School. The plans showed a beautiful art studio addition, with north-facing windows for optimal natural light, storage spaces for supplies, and an outdoor courtyard for open-air classes. What is this? Evelyn breathed, tracing the drawings with her fingertip. A donation from the Blackwood Foundation, Maxwell explained. Completely separate from the development deal. No strings attached. Evelyn looked up at him, suspicious despite her excitement. And this isn't an attempt to bribe me into supporting your project? The project is already approved, Maxwell pointed out. Your house is already safe. This is something else entirely. What then? Evelyn asked softly. Maxwell stepped closer, his usual confidence giving way to something more vulnerable. It's an apology for how this all began. It's recognition of what you showed me about value and preservation. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe it's a man trying to prove he can change, that he can see beyond balance sheets to what truly matters. The air between them shifted, charged with possibilities neither had allowed themselves to acknowledge until this moment. And what does truly matter, Maxwell Blackwood? Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Community, he said, moving closer still. Legacy, beauty. His eyes held hers. And you, Evelyn Morgan, you matter. The confession hung between them, honest and unguarded in a way neither had expected when this journey began. What about your career? Evelyn asked. Richard seemed ready to stage a coup. Maxwell shrugged. Richard's ambitious, but the board ultimately follows success. And I intend to make this revised development the most successful in the company's history. Proof that preservation and progress can coexist. And if they don't, then maybe it's time for a change, he said simply. I've been considering starting my own foundation focused on community-centered development. Turns out I know an excellent art teacher who could advise on the educational components. Evelyn laughed softly. You're serious, aren't you? You've really changed your perspective. Not changed, Maxwell corrected. Expanded. You didn't make me a different person, Evelyn. You just helped me remember parts of myself I'd forgotten in the pursuit of success. He reached for her hand, his touch sending a current of warmth up her arm. The question is, can the stubborn art teacher who hosed down a billionaire expand her perspective too? Enough to consider having dinner with me again, not as adversaries, not as a negotiation, but as something else. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, seeing not the corporate titan who'd arrived in his expensive car to buy her home, but the man who'd risked his reputation to preserve something he'd come to value. I think she might be persuaded, Evelyn replied with a small smile. Especially if Tony's tiramisu is involved. Maxwell's laugh was warm and genuine. I think that can be arranged. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and produced a small, beautifully wrapped package. One more thing, a housewarming gift of sorts. Curious, Evelyn unwrapped it to find a delicate antique teapot, hand-painted with golden stars against a blue background, remarkably similar to the family heirloom she'd broken upon receiving Blackwood Enterprises' initial offer letter. How did you... she began, touched beyond words. Penelope is remarkably thorough in her research, Maxwell admitted. I know it can't replace the original, but I thought... Evelyn silenced him by rising on tiptoe and pressing her lips gently to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Maxwell responded with equal gentleness, his hand coming up to cradle her face as if she were something precious and irreplaceable, which, he was beginning to understand, she was. When they parted, Evelyn's green eyes were bright with emotion. To new beginnings, she said softly, nodding toward the teapot. In old places. To foundations built to last, Maxwell agreed, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. And the people who remind us what's worth preserving. 1 year later, the Willow Creek Community Arts Center opened on a perfect spring day, sunlight streaming through the building's carefully restored Victorian windows. What had once been an abandoned textile factory now housed galleries, workshop spaces, and community meeting rooms, a perfect blend of historical preservation and modern functionality. Maxwell stood at the podium, looking out over the gathered crowd of neighborhood residents, city officials, and Blackwood Enterprises executives, Richard Carson was notably absent, having departed for a rival firm after his coup attempt fizzled in the face of the revised development's unexpected success. When we began this project, Maxwell said into the microphone, many believed that progress and preservation were opposing forces, that to build the future, we must sacrifice the past. His eyes found Evelyn in the front row, radiant in an emerald dress that matched her eyes. She gave him an encouraging smile. What we've created here proves otherwise, Maxwell continued. By honoring the history and character of Willow Creek, we've built something more valuable, more sustainable, and more meaningful than another cookie-cutter development. He gestured to the surrounding neighborhood, where historical homes stood proudly alongside, thoughtfully designed new structures that complemented rather than overwhelmed their older neighbors. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce the woman who made all this possible. The woman who taught me to see the value in things that can't be measured in dollars and cents. The future director of the Blackwood Foundation's Community Arts Initiative, and as of last Saturday, my fiancée, Evelyn Morgan. Applause erupted as Evelyn joined Maxwell at the podium, the vintage engagement ring on her finger catching the sunlight. It had belonged to his grandmother, a family heirloom he'd almost forgotten in his pursuit of the new and impressive. Later, as they walked hand in hand through the revitalized neighborhood, Maxwell marveled at how differently he saw the world now. Where once he had seen only assets and opportunities, he now saw stories, beauty, and possibilities for harmonious coexistence between past and future. "Penny for your thoughts," Evelyn said, squeezing his hand. "I was just thinking about value," Maxwell replied, "how the most valuable properties aren't always the ones with the highest price tags. Like a certain green Victorian cottage." Evelyn teased. "Especially that one," Maxwell agreed, pulling her close. "Though I'm still hoping the owner might consider a merger." Evelyn laughed, the sound as warm and inviting as the home they would share. "I think that could be arranged. After all, some offers are too good to refuse." As they continued their walk, the setting sun cast a golden glow over Willow Creek, old and new, preserved and developed, a community where the past and future had found a way to coexist in harmony. Much like the unlikely couple who had discovered that the most valuable foundations weren't built of concrete and steel, but of understanding, compromise, and love that was worth preserving at any cost.